Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's press briefing on our weather. This is Sarah Goulet from the Governor's Press Office, and I'm happy to introduce our speakers for today. Randy Padfield is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. Jeff Jumper, who is our State Meteorologist. Melissa Batula, who is Deputy Secretary for Highway Administration from PennDOT. And Lindsey Mauldin, Senior Advisor for COVID-19 Response for the Commonwealth. I'll now turn it over to Director Padfield.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm here with my colleagues who are joining remotely today from PEMA, Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, and Department of Health to provide an update regarding the current winter storm that is affecting portions of the Commonwealth. While today's storm is not near as severe as it could be in the Commonwealth, we still approach every storm during the winter with a consistent planning process, since we all have seen all too well how small changes in a forecast can set in motion a cascading sequence of events that can affect operations and ultimately the citizens across the Commonwealth. We just need to look to the southern states that are currently being adversely impacted by winter weather to see how quickly conditions can change and lives can be significantly impacted and daily routines significantly disrupted. We also need to understand how severe weather across the nation and weather impacts outside the Commonwealth can potentially affect operations or functions within the state, such as what we are seeing currently with vaccine shipping delays from the major hubs in other areas of the country that have been adversely impacted by weather systems. It takes awareness of these interdependencies, anticipation of impacts, and dedicated planning to compensate for situations that occur outside the Commonwealth that ultimately affect functions within the state. As we normally do, in the days leading up to this storm, we monitored the forecast and had a series of coordination calls with state agencies to discuss plans. Last night, we added additional staffing to our Commonwealth Response Coordination Center and brought in our partners in storm preparedness, such as PennDOT, Pennsylvania State Police, and the Turnpike Commission to monitor conditions and adjust plans accordingly. I'm pleased to report that we have not seen any significant impacts across the state since the storm began last night. However, we always need to be prepared to respond as needed to protect the citizens of the Commonwealth. It's also important to understand that preparedness starts at the local or individual level. When individuals are better prepared for situations such as winter weather, we are as a whole more resilient and better able to handle impacts such as loss of power, loss of heat, difficult travel conditions, and disruptions in the supply chain for necessities such as food and water, much of what we're seeing across the South right now. I'd like to personally thank all the Pennsylvanians that are committed to doing their part to be prepared for situations such as this, not just on days like today, but every day. It provides us the ability to collectively focus on the other important aspects of our jobs and continue to work with our county partners and other stakeholders to keep all citizens safe. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Jumper, State Meteorologist, to provide an update on the current storm. Jeff?
Thanks, Director Padfield. We've been watching this storm since early this morning, moving through portions of southern and eastern Pennsylvania. I brought some moderate to heavy snowfall areas just generally east of the Interstate 83 corridor and south of the Interstate 81 to 78 corridors. That's where the bulk of this has fallen through the morning hours today. Steadiest and heaviest precipitation has been falling through those morning hours and is starting to wrap up now, with some sleet and freezing rain mixing in toward the southern border near the Philadelphia area. Additional pockets of some light snow and maybe some moderate pockets will continue through tonight, finally exiting the state as we head into tomorrow morning. I think this thing wraps up pretty quickly by then, but after this batch that went through this morning, we're only expecting a couple more inches as we head into the evening and overnight hours tonight, with a little bit of a lull ongoing right now. We did see spots in the southeast part of the state with near a foot of snowfall from this. They got kind of thumped pretty hard with some of the snow coming through, but that is all wrapping up at this point. And there's some watches or winter storm warnings and advisories out for portions of Pennsylvania that are being updated to match what's going on across the Commonwealth here. Temperatures are going to stay below freezing here through tonight into tomorrow until we get into tomorrow afternoon, where we finally rise above freezing a bit. And we do have a quiet weekend expected for us. We are anticipating as we roll through the weekend, things to stay quiet until we get into early next week. Showing the screen here, just want to show you that snow is moving out of the Commonwealth at this point. There is a break in activity, but off to the south here, we are seeing a little bit of lighter snow trying to work its way back in, and we do anticipate that through the overnight hours. With that being said, As mentioned, we did have some snowfall amounts in the southeast part of the state, near 10 inches or so at this point, with another couple of inches expected. So some of those locations may end up picking up close to a foot. Areas out to the west have picked up about 3 to 6 inches, and farther north and west, less than that, 1 to 3 inches expected as we roll through the evening hours and overnight tonight. As we roll through the rest of the storm system. So we're expecting the bulk of this to pretty much be over at this point in time. And as we roll through the next few days, we will get a chance for things to calm down for a little while.
Our next speaker is Melissa from PennDOT. Go ahead, Melissa.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I want to thank all of you for being with us today. So I also want to thank our committed teams at PennDOT, Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission, and for their incredible work and dedication through the challenging conditions, especially the numerous storms we've had in succession here. We were and remain in active communication with other agencies, other states, and our industry partners. Just a quick note on our driver and vehicle operations. Due to the weather, driver license and photo license centers in many counties throughout the state are closed today, including the Riverfront Office Center in Harrisburg. So you can always check dmv.pa.gov for more information on those closures. Regarding the roadways, I'd like to share some updates. So across most of the state, we saw isolated incidents that often occur during these types of storms. And additionally, we have implemented speed and vehicle restrictions on roadways in the most highly impacted areas of the state. So these were done with a balance of precaution and flexibility to keep goods moving. We may implement additional speed restrictions if warranted as the storm continues and wraps up, but you can always check 511pa.com for the latest information on those restrictions. So now in this storm, as we have in previous storms, we have mobilized teams from the southwest region of the state to assist with the hardest hit areas. And while we're out in force to keep the roads safe and passable, it is truly critical that you avoid travel if you can, especially in those impacted areas. We always prioritize our higher traffic routes so that vehicles that must travel can do so as safely as possible. And we also prioritize routes leading to our health facilities. So we move staff both during and before the storm to address the specific regional needs. And again, that 511pa.com is a continued resource for the latest travel information. So when the storm does move out, as it's doing right now, our mission does continue. As with every storm, we continue to treat the roadways throughout the storm until the roads are clear. And then as cleanup continues, we ask the public to avoid that non-essential traffic so our crews can really get in there and clear the roads. It will take some time till we fully clear all lanes and the shoulders. And even if a road does appear clear, just keep in mind of the slow-moving plows that are out there in full force. So our 511PA service also shows 1,000 traffic cameras. They show where our vehicles are and when the state roads were last plowed. So it's a great source of information for you. And we ask that you continue to be our partners in keeping our roadways safe. So as always, that means if you must drive, please do so based on the conditions. So slowing down, giving our plows and other drivers plenty of space. So please think of safety first today and every day. And I thank you. So now I'm going to turn things over to Lindsey Mauldin of the Department of Health to provide an update on the vaccine delivery.
Thank you, Melissa. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsey Mauldin, a Senior Advisor on the COVID response. Thanks to our partners at PEMA and PennDOT for all they're doing to keep us safe. As they've noted, the United States has been affected by multiple rounds of adverse winter weather, and we have seen that here in Pennsylvania. This weather has affected the shipment of both the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines from the manufacturing facilities. Moderna vaccine was not shipped on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday from the distributor. Pfizer was not shipped on Monday, and limited doses were shipped on both Tuesday and Wednesday. The CDC is working with shipping partners and distributors to resume shipments as quickly and safely as possible. However, there will be a significant backlog of orders for distribution as a result of the adverse weather. The current storm affecting Pennsylvania may also delay any shipments that were sent out this week from reaching vaccine providers. The department is working very closely with our partners at PEMA and on the ground to monitor the inventory of vaccine in Pennsylvania. We do understand that these weather delays will impact the ability to get vaccine into arms, and we want to remind everyone who has a vaccine appointment scheduled to contact your provider before traveling. Thank you. And I think we'll turn it back to questions now to Director Padfield.
Thanks so much, Lindsey. We're going to start our questions now. We'd ask that reporters, if they can, because we always have a lot of reporters, could stick to one question and one follow-up if you do have it. So we're going to begin with David Wenner from Penn Live. Go ahead, David. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Lindsey, you mentioned, you just summarized the delays in delivery, and you mentioned it affects Moderna. To what extent will that, affect the ability to, correct the situation that was described yesterday, and, make sure those people can you still get the doses to those people within the 42 days?
We're still assessing that, and I think we believe that we can, but we're still assessing that and working with our partners on the ground at PEMA to make sure that we can get those vaccines out as quickly as possible.
Thank you. We're going to go to Grace Griffithton from Fox 43. Go ahead, Grace.
Can you hear me? Okay, thanks for taking my question. Related to the weather impacting vaccine distribution, we know that several vaccine providers in our area were impacted this week. Do you guys have a rough estimate or a number of how many providers that were impacted this week, and how many do you expect will be impacted next week due to the weather?
Yeah, Grace, I think it's safe to say that a majority of our providers have been affected by the weather. I'm happy to provide specifics from our press office on exactly what those numbers might look like. And I also think we're continuing to work with PEMA to understand how the weather next week might affect distribution. And of course, we'll stay in touch with our partners at the CDC as well to see what's happening there.
Just a quick follow-up, specifically when the shipments don't come in from Kentucky or wherever they're coming from, what happens to those vaccine allotments? Do those vaccine allotments go to the DOH and then get distributed? Or if some make it and some don't, how does that whole process work?
Yeah, so I think, again, I'll have to get you specifics on how the process works with it coming into DOH, especially with some of these delays. But ultimately, again, our role at DOH is to try to get that vaccine as quickly as possible in and then out to providers.
Should patients be aware of anything if they had a vaccine appointment scheduled this week or next?
Patients should stay in touch with their providers, again, to understand if there are any delays on their end as well, because, again, I understand there were multiple closings across the Commonwealth. So I think our message is for folks to stay in really close touch with their providers to understand what delays might be occurring.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to go on to Michael Gorsinger from CBS 21. Go ahead, Michael.
Lindsey, this question is for you. I know we talked yesterday about the department not releasing kind of where the mistake happened, but do you have an idea about what kind of entities or a number of those kind of entities that'll be affected? And on top of that, will second dose orders be filled for family doctors who have already given the first dose, but are now being phased out in this newest approach?
Sure. So the first question, I believe, is related to the weather. I think that, again, a majority of folks might see the delay from the weather. And again, we're happy to get more specifics there. And then I think to your second question, it's hard to say, again, the Secretary mentioned yesterday, it's hard to say really with specific providers, but I will check in on those that you've mentioned to find out how they might be affected both by the weather and by what we have mentioned this week happening at the department.
Thank you. Next, we have Nina Feldman from WHYY. Go ahead, Nina.
Thanks so much for taking my question. A similar vein as everybody else's. So for the doses that weren't delivered, were they not delivered to DOH or were they not delivered directly to providers? Because I know some hospitals, for instance, receive the shipments directly. Or
right.
both.
So I believe it's a little bit of both. I do believe that distribution to both DOH and directly to providers and hospitals has been delayed because of the weather.
And then follow up to that, for the ones that were going to DOH that DOH would then distribute, assuming that DOH still has some doses, how does it decide who to prioritize gets the limited number that it does have versus, which doses are delayed?
We'll maintain the allocation distribution strategy that we had already been working on this week. But again, we'll just continue to work with providers to help them understand the delays and how this might affect distribution both this week and next week.
Thank you. Next, we have Melanie Gillespie from I'm so sorry. Melanie is from WPXI. I'm sorry, Melanie. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Even with the weather and the delays that you're seeing, and this kind of follows up to that last question that was asked, but will you prioritize like hotspot counties when those shipments do start to trickle in? Will they start to see those first doses even if they're delayed?
So we, again, are continuing to work with counties and our partners on the ground to make sure that we have and can get them the vaccine that they have been allocated. And so, again, we'll continue to work with those folks as we understand how the delays might work and what distribution might look like over the coming days.
Thank you. Next, we have Andrew from ABC 27. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, hi. I guess my question is, we've heard from some of these vaccine providers or the vaccine administrators who are saying because of the weather delay, they would run out of vaccines as soon as next week if nothing comes in. Is there advice that the Department of Health is giving to those vaccine providers about how to move forward in those situations?
We, again, continue to work with providers on the ground. And again, I think we are continuing to work with PEMA to understand how these delays might affect folks specifically in those hotspot counties that you all have mentioned. So we'll continue to do that, and we'll continue to collaborate with partners closely to make sure that they're aware of what those delays might be and how they might affect them in the coming days and also in the coming weeks.
And maybe just one quick follow-up there. Would there be any indication, because some vaccine administrators are still waiting on their shots, that they would get extra allocation next week or so on and so forth to make up for that?
I would want to be careful in saying that, again, just to make sure that we stay on track with the allocation strategy that we had been following and to make sure that folks get the vaccine in arms that are needing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jim Melwart from KYW. Go ahead, Jim.
I understand the Department of Health is bringing in a consulting group to help. My understanding is to determine where a vaccine could go. Can you shed any light on that and kind of how that will work and help the situation?
Sure. So we have brought in a consulting group to help with the distribution and allocation. Again, I think the Secretary's talked about the complex distribution and math that goes into it. And I think, again, just to ensure that we are continuing to provide the most equitable and efficient response, we find that it's necessary to bring in a consultant to help us work out some of those complexities.
And do you have a cost on that?
I don't today, but I am happy to follow up.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Paul Go from the Pittsburgh Business Times. Go ahead, Paul.
Hi, this question's for Lindsey as well, and thanks for taking the time. So you have sort of two things going on at once with these, both the weather delays that were last week and this week, and then also the Moderna mix-up. You talked about how there was a 3-week timeline to kind of fix the second dose allocations. Do you have an updated thing because of the weather, because of all the supply issues? It looks like you have two sort of drains on that. Is that going to change the 3-week timeline, and how will you address that?
At this time, I don't believe it will change the timeline, but again, I think we're still assessing that as we talk with local providers and our folks on the ground to understand what's happening. So again, if that timeline does change, we will keep folks apprised, and of course, the providers would be the first to know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Sam Dunclaw from WITF. Go ahead, Sam.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Do appreciate it. This first one's for anybody who wants to take it. I mean, how does the snow that's fallen this year compare to past years? I mean, has this kind of really been, the seasonal business as usual, if you will?
I'll take that one if everyone's all right, and then I'll let Jeff jump in. At least from my perspective, we're using more salt than we have in the last few years by quite a bit. So it's been worse than recent years, at least for our response standpoint. I'll let Jeff weigh in on whatever statistics he'd like to share.
Sure. Luckily, I still have a paper here from the other day when we had the last snowstorm. Up until about February 11th, just going across the state, it's it's snowfall to date. So from the start of the season up until here we go. From the start of the season up until February 11th or so, it did look like some of the snowfall in some of the areas is within the top 10. That doesn't necessarily guarantee it's going to be in the top 10 snowiest seasons for the entire year, but we did have several locations that did see top 10 kind of snowfalls. Just trying to find some of my notes here, but nonetheless, yeah, some locations we certainly have had much more snow to date than we typically have in a year. But we still have 6 to 8 weeks left to kind of add on some of those totals. Hopefully not for many locations unless there's snow lovers out there. But yeah, we are seeing a significant and kind of every 2 to 3 days to get a snowstorm is somewhat unusual for us as of late. So we are starting to see that pattern break down a little bit. So we may get fewer snow events here coming up.
Thank you. That is all the time we have for today. All of our folks who are speakers, we thank you for your time. We know you have a lot of things to get back to today with the weather. Thank you to our reporters for joining us today. And we hope everyone has a great rest of their day and stay safe out there. Thank you.